Okay, afternoon everybody. So I've got the unenviable job of A, keeping you awake in the graveyard shift after lunch, and B, generating some interest in this topic of preventing financial crime. Thanks, Tim. It's definitely prevention of financial crime, not propagation of financial crime. Yes, I do play two roles. I've got two hats in the bank at Santander. I've been running the change and transformation program for the bank over the last fair few years. Thank you. So seeing the advent of digitization and how that impacts our customers and what we got to do to keep up with the times, particularly with the fintechs and the neobanks of the world. We can touch upon that in the context of transforming financial crime itself, which is what my focus has been over the course of the last year or so, in particular. So as part of my transformation hat, particularly zooming in on financial crime. And why financial crime? Because it's the hot topic, obviously. Criminals are becoming more and more sophisticated, as most of you will know. Unfortunately, the UK is becoming a bit of a attractive place for criminals, both from a financial crime and fraud perspective, just given our maturity from a financial services point of view around the globe, and B, the fact that it's a cosmopolitan hub where people of all races, gender, countries, backgrounds come and reside here and transact and do business here. So the UK is unfortunately becoming one of those hubs where the financial institutions have got to work harder alongside the regulators to try and do everything and anything in our power to prevent fraudsters from succeeding in the financial crime and fraud arena. So here's a little bit of a background, and probably familiar to some of you in terms of pain points, which are fairly generic in some cases, but certainly in the financial crime sector for a lot of the banks and financial institutions. Whenever you talk about some of the large organizations over a course of X number of decades based on acquisitions and so on and so forth, you build a spaghetti of complex infrastructure in the background with your IT platforms and systems and applications. And equally, regulation after regulation comes in, and sometimes you'll think about what is the right solution, which might sound right at that point in time, but that starts to add layers of complexity. And therefore, when you take a step back and look at it, you kind of find it's complex processes in a complex web of IT applications, and very often organizations can't see the wood from the trees. Sound familiar? There's a few nods around the room, right? And that's what happens. So it's important that you take a step back from time to time and think about what is it that we're asking our folks on the floor to do, because we make it so complex for the people on the floor that we don't even realize actually, in order to both fulfill policy, regulatory or compliance requirements, but making sure there is enough oil in the engine from a customer journey point of view for it to run smoothly. How do you balance the two things? And that's never an easy exercise. So what you do is you think about it from a process point of view, a technology point of view, from a people point of view, and say, what are the root causes and what do I do? So what we did at Santander was thought about how do I meet our regulatory and compliance timescales or requirements or obligations, and divided into 4 foundational pillars. And I want to try and simplify this so that folks can understand, irrespective of what background or organization you come from. And it's about making sure there are some risk indicators, right? Am I or am I not mitigating the risk of identifying a criminal amongst millions of good customers? Otherwise, there's no point, right? Otherwise, I'm going to either impact and piss off every customer, or equally, I'm not going to catch the criminals either, in terms of a needle in a haystack. So how do you have your key risk indicators? How do you make sure your control environment is satisfactory so that if a risk does arise, I know how to catch that in time rather than regretting it post the incident, when the criminal activity has already taken place. Third, how do I make sure, of course, I'm fully up to date with the interpretation of the regulation and how does that apply to my business, right? Doesn't matter whether I'm a retail bank or an investment bank or a payment services provider or an insurance provider or whatever, various parts of any large-scale global bank that we are part of. And fourth and last, how do you make sure that you get a degree of assurance? You might think I'm doing the right thing, but it's useful to get an independent view of life and say, actually what you're doing in a day-to-day operation like financial crime not only satisfies the regulatory and compliance obligations, but does it in a manner which is, customer-centric. So how do you get that independent view of life? So that's how we divided it into 4 pillars. And what you find is very quickly that there are plenty of opportunities when you try and transform something like that. So I put them into 4 buckets, okay? And what you got to think about is Santander UK is part of a much larger global group called Banco Santander, headquartered out of Madrid, but we operate mainly in 10, 11 geographies across Europe, North and South America. And it's how do you make sure that you put the group muscle together rather than trying to solve a KYC or a financial crime problem just on your own in the UK, because frankly, the criminals don't just operate within the boundaries of the United Kingdom, right? They think about it as an opportunity globally and how you can take advantage of that. So aligning those views is quite important. If I go from a technology lens point of view, and there's a lot of conversations yesterday and today, you would have heard about AI, of course, right? And what do you do? And for me, the way I think about it is twofold. AI is, for us to be running and sprinting. And there are some aspects where you need to learn to walk first before you can start to sprint and run in a marathon. And therefore, automation, for example, has various forms. I don't need a sledgehammer to crack a nut of automating certain parts of a process of a customer journey, of meeting our compliance or regulatory obligations. And we don't jump to, I can put in 30 AI applications and have a pipeline there and spend a gazillion quid and then suddenly find actually, I still have part of the problem left over. So what we're thinking about is what's the appropriate solution for the problems at hand? The pain points that I showed you a minute back in terms of process or inadequate technology or inadequate controls, or from a competency and knowledge from a people perspective where folks are involved, how do you fix that at the root using appropriate technology solutions? And I say appropriate and where applicable, because it can be a gamut of simple automations all the way through to complex AI products or applications. And having that clarity of thought would be one piece of advice if you take away from this afternoon, from this conversation. My advice to folks who are trying to crack problems like these is there's not one single solution, there's no one single answer, right? I talk to folks, frankly, every day who come and sell me AI solutions as part of my transformation hat. And I've seen solutions from simple applications to complex applications across the widest gamut of the bank. And it's how do you choose which technology to deploy at the appropriate point for the appropriate process or pain point that you have. And the last thing I would say is making sure that you've got the right strategy from a people, location, skills perspective, because that's still important, right? Technology on its own ain't going to solve everything and anything. You've got to have the right blend between what, in my mind, as AI is augmented intelligence rather than artificial intelligence. Big believer in augmented intelligence. It's got to be a combination of the human brain and the machine brain. And it's how do you make sure that you've got the right folks with the right skills, with the right attitude in the right location to do the right job. So that's how I would encourage people to think about it. So how do you make sure that you set up for success using those pillars, using that thought process? It's making sure, particularly, and probably not saying anything new because this is good old-fashioned change management, by the way, making sure you've got the right people on the pitch, right? Identifying the folks that you need early on who are going to be your promoters and not just your detractors, early on in the pitch. And having the courage to be able to create the right environment for having the conversation with folks to say, you're either on the bus or no thanks if you're not on the bus, right? Making sure that you've got the diagnostic done. We often find ourselves in a transformation journey diving straight to the solution because everybody gets excited about the solution, right? That's where the sexy stuff is. And we don't often take enough time to do the diagnostic, understand the root cause of the issue, not just at a surface or symptomatic level, but truly diving in 2 layers deeper and having a look at where the root cause is. It's like any other field. You go into the field of healthcare. The symptoms are whatever you see in your body on the surface, and there might be a gazillion things happening inside your body. How do you get to that root cause? And the third and last thing is making sure whatever plan you do, it's built on the right expectations. Ambitious, but built on the right expectations, both with internal stakeholders and obviously with regulators. And therefore you manage those expectations rather than failing those expectations at the end of it when it comes to the delivery of the transformation. So like I said, it's basic, simple stuff. There's no rocket science here, but in my humble experience, what I find is, when you're in the middle of a large-scale transformation as an organization, often you get caught up in the rhetoric of what the end result should look like and forget some of the basics that you would have in a small project, for example. So it's just taking care of the individual foundational elements rather than just the end goal. Here's an example of what you do from a process point of view. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the term process mining. Highly encourage you. Doesn't matter whether you're a neobank, a fintech, a service provider, a large-scale financial institution, any sector, whether it's retail banking, insurance, wealth management, whatever. Have a look at what does your customer journey look like. In reality, what does your customer journey look like? Not everybody follows the happy path as much as we would like it to, as much we would expect it to. Very few of your customers will follow a happy path. Doesn't matter whether it's onboarding a new customer to your organization or servicing an existing customer for that matter. If you think that every customer is following the well-defined path that you've got, step A to B to C to D, have a think again, right? I think that you will find when you get into the guts of it, there's plenty of permutations and combinations and handoffs and elements of technology functionality and people attitudinal issues that crop up. And that's why I put them into the buckets of process, technology, people, to be able to solve for what looks like a spaghetti of process flow or customer journey flow rather than what you would expect at the highest level. And that's what you've got to solve for. I will leave you with 2 thoughts, which is, like any other transformation program, financial crime is no different. You always get, in a complex program, in a large scale, over a period of time program, you always get speed bumps along the way. In my humble experience, it's not the ability to identify those bumps, it's the ability to identify and anticipate those bumps early in the life cycle. Nobody appreciates surprises. I'm sure you know that as individuals and collectively as a team. No stakeholder likes surprises when you say, yeah, everything's green, hunky-dory, and a month before, a week before, 48 hours before, the project goes from green to amber or green to red. That's a thankless task, right? And therefore, it's how do you identify stuff early? More importantly for me, probably most importantly for me, in large-scale transformation programs, you always have successes, no question about it, right? Small wins, big wins, it doesn't matter. I believe that the best way to motivate teams and to encourage them to do more and becoming a virtuous cycle is when you celebrate those wins. And really, frankly, it doesn't matter whether that's visible to your customer or your internal customers or to regulators or not. you start to celebrate those small wins. That creates a momentum for the bigger wins and the much bigger wins at the end of the day. And again, that like sounds pretty obvious, doesn't it? But we don't often do that in large-scale transformation programs. So those are the key messages. Very simple stuff. I'm not a financial crime expert, by the way. I'm a change and process guy, always have been. And I believe that this is the way to change and transform in any organization what feels like pretty daunting regulatory asks to start with. You start to break it down into the components, and then it becomes a little bit easier to travel through that journey. That's it. Thank you. Open to questions if I have time.